Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave White. I'm the Recreation Specialist with New York Sea Grant, and welcome to webinar number 4, dealing with the public handling harassment and other issues. We're delighted to have you all with us. A little bit on my background, and I'm extremely excited about this series and specifically today's topic. I have been working with New York Sea Grant for a number of years and have been working with the invasive species issue since zebra mussels were first found in the late 80s. I myself have actually ran some of our steward programs that were focused on Eastern Lake Ontario and invasive species, and actually produced the first video on protecting your boat from zebra mussels back in the late 80s. So this topic has been a part of my programming area for well over 2 decades now. I thank you for joining us, and I want to provide a couple of housekeeping details before we get into the bulk of today's program. If you participated in other webinars, you probably have heard some of this, but we like to reiterate it so everybody is on board. We will be recording today's webinar, and it'll be available on the New York Sea Grant website, as well as the New York Invasive Species Clearinghouse. And I saw some chat just a moment ago. They're all being refined and edited to go up online, and we hope to have them up online within a week or two for folks to take advantage of and to share with your staff as you proceed forward. Toward the end of the presentation today, and for anyone who has to get off early, we will post in the chat box a link to an evaluation. As with any good extension program, especially webinars, we would really appreciate any of your thoughts, concerns, issues for future webinars as well. So we would definitely ask you to take a few minutes of your time. It's very short, but the responses, as you well know, are extremely, extremely important to all of us. Currently, everyone is muted to avoid any background noise. If you have questions, you want to ask anything, please submit it through the chat box. Samantha is here as our technical guru, and we'll make sure that things are working as we proceed forward, and she can respond in the chat box to any technical questions you have or concerns, and then obviously we'll help during the Q&A part of the program. So with a further delay, we want to move forward to the presentation of today. And it's a pleasure to introduce Sue O'Reilly, who will be our speaker today. She's the Stewardship Program Data Manager for the Adirondack Watershed Institute at Paul Smith's College. And as many know, Paul Smith has been one of the leading programs in the state as we respond to invasive species and specifically watercraft inspection programs. She's a Air Force veteran, and thank you for your service, Sue. We all appreciate that. And she earned a BS in Biological Sciences from the University of New Orleans. My favorite part is prior to working in the invasive species field, she spent the bulk of 15 years working in meteorology and science support at research stations in the Antarctic. So the second hour of the webinar will be a slide presentation. I'm just kidding, Susan, but I think that's absolutely fascinating. And she's been working with the Adirondack Watershed Institute Stewardship Program since 2014. So with that, if I click the right buttons, which we always help with the new technology works, I'm going to turn it over to Susan and look forward to hearing her thoughts on this extremely important topic on handling harassment and other issues. And again, would remind everyone, if you do have to leave early, we understand that, but we would ask that you take a couple of minutes before you depart and take the evaluation. So with that, hopefully I will stop sharing and we will allow Susan to jump in.
Okay, let me get my screen shared here. All right, it'll take my computer a second to full screen, but I'll just launch right in. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Sue O'Reilly from the AWI. Dave, thank you for that lovely introduction. My current program position is the data manager for the stewardship program here, and my duties include planning our steward training each year, which is why I work with the issues around protecting our stewards on the job. I've been with the AWI since 2014, and I worked as a steward and also as a direct supervisor at the launches before I moved up to overall management. This picture here is actually me working at Upper Saranac Lake in 2014. Okay, so the AWI is one of the oldest and currently the largest steward program in New York State. Last year was our 19th year of operation, and we were invited to give this presentation today due to the depth of our experience and the fact that we've made a major effort to refocus our training on steward safety since our program's recent rapid growth. We're nearly 4 times larger now than we were in 2014 due to the allocation of more funds from New York State to prevent aquatic invasive species spread. And today I'm going to start with a general summary of the hazards and bad things that can happen at launches, although the bulk of this presentation will focus on sexual harassment training. And I do apologize in advance that this isn't a topic that lends itself easily to informational graphs and tables. So except for this slide, there won't be a lot for you to study while I'm talking, but I'll try my best to keep the flow interesting since you'll be mainly listening to me explain what we've learned. And I do know that many of you have been running your own programs for a while, but I also designed this for people who may be new to supervising stewards. So please bear with me if I cover some subjects that are already familiar to some of you. All right, a steward's environment. Stewards have a unique job where they work in an open public environment. They spend their days inspecting boats, convincing people to let them inspect those boats, educating people about aquatic invasive species. But unlike most jobs, they don't have any control over who enters their workplace or how those people behave. It's often a very enjoyable job for those who like being outdoors. And you can see the beautiful view for our Racket Lake steward here on the top right. And if they enjoy interacting with lots of people, it's also a great job. But there are downsides and hazards that come along with the territory because of the nature of the workplace. Now, AWI's territory is really variable because we cover such a large geographic area. So there are different types of launches in our program. There's 2 main categories, and the first is depicted here. Busy launches, or launches that are located in busy or populated areas. Fourth Lake on the top left has one of the highest boat traffic counts in our program. Racket Lake Village launch on the right is located directly in front of a general store with several other businesses close by. And Lake Flower on the bottom right is in the middle of downtown Saranac Lake. So there are businesses and homes all around there. Now, the advantage of a busy location is that a steward's more likely to have other people around if something bad happens. But the downside is that the higher traffic means an increase in the frequency of unusual activity that they'll probably see just because there will be more people there. Now, our other main category is pictured here, the remote or quieter launches. They're located in less traveled or lower populated areas within our program. All 3 of these launches are far away from town centers, and there are no nearby houses, businesses, or anything. The upside of these locations is they're often used by car-top boaters, meaning canoes and kayaks, who, as a group, they're generally pretty low-key, friendly, happy to interact with our stewards. But the downside of these locations is, as one of our staff said, he called them the "nobody can hear you if you scream" launches, which is a scary phrase, but basically true. If something bad happens, the steward probably doesn't have any quick help nearby. Now, I'm aware that some people listening to this may not have any launches that strictly fall into this remote category, but that doesn't mean that your launches in busy or central areas might not share the characteristics at times, like during the beginning or the end of the season when the traffic is quieter, or on bad weather days when most people aren't around. So thinking about this category can still help you to consider its working conditions. So no matter what type of launch your steward is working, boat launches are unpredictable places. There's constant motion from vehicles and equipment. As we know, people are not always skilled at backing up their vehicles, and backing up happens all day at launches. One of the first safety items we teach our stewards is to be extremely careful going behind the boats or standing between the vehicle and the boat near the trailer hitch, that they should always make sure the vehicle's in park if the boater is still inside their vehicle. And as mentioned before, it's an uncontrolled environment. Anyone can enter or behave in any way that they want. and stewards are constantly exposed to everything, weather, animals, human behavior. Now, this list covers a range of incidents that can happen at the launch. Sometimes an incident will be entertaining instead of uncomfortable for your stewards. Like a couple years ago, one of mine reported that a drunk guy at a nearby cottage was yelling "Aflac" at a bunch of ducks for so long that they just couldn't stop laughing. Or any steward who's worked more than a couple weeks will know the comedy of a boater forgetting to put their drain plug in and running around frantically to retrieve the boat before it fills with water. But most of the time, these incidents aren't funny, even though, as the slide says, the stewards are usually watching rather than being directly involved. One of the worst in our program was when a man accidentally sliced open his teenage daughter's leg with the boat prop while they were tubing. And the boat came back to the launch with the whole family screaming their heads off and the girl's blood all over the boat. Luckily, an ambulance was already waiting and our steward didn't need to get involved, but it was still a traumatic thing to witness. So if anything like this happens while your stewards are working, make sure to keep checking that they're doing okay mentally. They may need extra support or to be switched temporarily to a different boat launch if that's possible. Just keep checking on them. And preparing your stewards for emergencies. We ensure that every steward has the local numbers for police, DC dispatch, everything else listed here. Of course, they can dial 911 for critical situations. Well, they can if they have cell service, which a good number of our Adirondack locations do not, and stewards have to drive away from the launch to make a phone call. But even when they have the option of dialing 911, we still find that it helps them to have access to the list of non-emergency numbers too, because of the unpredictable things that can happen. Sometimes it isn't clearly a 911 style emergency, but they still need to ask for help or advice. And for this reason, we also make sure they can always reach someone in management. So they receive the full contact list for everyone up to our director. With all the weird stuff that can occur, even the best training and procedures don't always prepare them for everything, so they may need guidance at any time. If they can't immediately reach their own supervisor, that person may be out of cell service range or they have the day off. The stewards can call another supervisor or a program manager like me, and so on. I know that many programs don't have as many support staff as we do, but no matter the size of your program, you should ensure that your stewards always have more than one person to contact. And when they start working, we also make sure that they're aware of nearby safe places. If they're working at a DC campgrounds, they can reach out to the staff or to nearby businesses or local residents who are known to our program. Possibly they've already supported our stewards in the past. Anywhere close by that they can get help, familiarize them with these locations. And as it says, most boaters, our stewards encounter will be nice. The average steward encounter is pretty short and not memorable. Folks want to get on and off the water, but unfortunately, some encounters will not be nice. The first on the bottom list, just basic unfriendliness or disinterest in the AIS message. It happens with some boaters, and we train our stewards to do their best, but not to push people to the point of getting more annoyed with it. Angry boaters are a different type. They may be mad because they don't believe the stewards have the right to talk to them, or because they think AIS is not a valid issue. Some people think this way. Sometimes in our Adirondack area, some people have a pre-existing bad opinion of the DC or the Adirondack Park Agency, and our stewards might get rolled into the same governmental category in their heads. So they may be angry before the steward even opens the conversation. So this can also apply to someone who just had an argument with a family member or is angry about something else in their personal life, and they choose to take it out on the steward. We train our stewards not to approach this type of person if they're able to clearly pick up the vibe in advance. If someone just finished screaming at their spouse about backing up the boat, it's not the right time to talk to them about AIS. So let that boat go. And of course, we inform our stewards that they should always end an interaction. If it goes in an angry direction, they shouldn't keep trying to convince people to let them inspect the boat, because we never want them to escalate a situation and possibly put themselves in more danger. The last category here, targeted aggression. It may happen because a boater decides that they just don't like a particular steward or the steward's approach, or it may happen for other reasons. Racial remarks are not the most common thing with our AWI program because the stewards are usually the same ethnic demographic as the boaters they're speaking to. But in some situations where this isn't the case, racial harassment has occurred. Just like with the angry boaters, we emphasize very strongly to the stewards that they do not need to keep interacting with anyone who is abusing them. They should just end the interaction and walk away. And if they see that boater again, they don't have to speak to them and continue to receive more abuse. Okay, safety priority number 1. And I can't repeat that lead sentence enough. We tell it to our stewards many times during training. If they feel unsafe, they must leave the launch immediately. And I bulleted this out so explicitly because it's necessary. Tell it to your staff several times. Leave the launch and call your supervisor after you leave, because some people need to hear validation of their actions with this. They may feel tied to their work location and like they're being irresponsible if they abandon their post without permission. When I was a direct supervisor, a steward called me from a remote launch and told me a group of people were drinking heavily right next to the launch. They were shouting and roughhousing, and they had dogs running around and biting. And she was extremely nervous and didn't feel safe, but she still called me to get permission to leave first. And ever since then, we tell that story in training, and we assure the stewards that they'll never get in trouble for prioritizing their own safety. And I mean, to you, this might seem like a common sense thing to do, leave and then call, but after you've employed enough people, you will just find a wide variety in the way they react to situations. So it's really essential that you state the policy very clearly to your staff, and then they'll be more likely to quickly get themselves to a safe place. And flashing back to the previous slide, we now move into the main type of targeted aggression that stewards will experience, which is sexual harassment. And both of these definitions here are so important. Any contact of a sexual nature, verbal or physical, that makes them uncomfortable. And then this second definition, a more relatable, casual one. While you are at work, no one should ever remind you you're capable of having sex. When our educator said the second one in our training last year, I saw so many heads nodding in agreement around the lecture hall. Explaining these definitions so clearly can help your stewards understand that sexual harassment includes more than just the most serious situations where someone puts hands on them. It is unfortunately the most common event that stewards will experience of the list of bad things. And while most of them won't escalate to physical contact, outright assault, obviously it's still a really unpleasant thing to experience, and it's often the worst part of the job for them. Now at AWI, we didn't always have the level of harassment training that we have today. We made it better because the standard workplace training materials aren't usually geared to an outdoor environment where unknown people can enter at will and where you're often working alone. As the second point describes, AWI has had a lot of people like me who know what it's like to work a full season at a launch, move up into management, and we push to amplify the harassment training to help the stewards coming after us. All right, and the evolution of our training. When our program was smaller, there was no particular emphasis on launch harassment. The HR staff here at Paul Smith College gave the normal training that all other employees receive. And if your stewards are employed under an umbrella organization like ours, you may currently be in the same situation. That training is still valuable. It's often really good for talking about situations with coworkers or supervisors, but it just isn't geared toward the life of a boat steward. So in 2016, we began doing a specialized steward talk after the HR presentation. I talked about how stewards should leave the launch. I encouraged them to protect themselves. And a few returning stewards shared stories about things that had happened to them. And the next year we did the same thing, but opened it up more, allowed more time for discussion. It was a definite improvement over the past, but it had major room for more. So last year, 2018, we asked a sexual assault prevention educator to deliver the talk. And this was so important because, well, I've learned a lot about this subject in the last few years. I wasn't specifically trained to connect with people about an emotionally loaded and delicate topic like sexual harassment. So we wanted to go a step further and have a professional who knew how to deliver the message in the exact right way. She spoke to our supervisors during their separate training that they have before the stewards come in about how to help their employees. And then she addressed our entire group during the main training. It was incredibly effective, and the stewards opened up to us more than they ever had before. So I highly recommend this for any program that can do it. Our educator, she met with me beforehand, and I explained all the dynamics of working boat launches, and she tailored her presentations to fit our circumstances, which was outstanding. So how it happened, most of the time when harassment happens, it's the lower level of joking or giving a compliment. The boater makes a suggestive remark about a steward or pays an unwelcome amount of attention to them. And then there's the other categories described here: repeated comments, explicit comments, touching, stalking. All of these have happened to stewards in our program. We have never had a rape reported in our program, but sadly that's no guarantee that it hasn't occurred. It's so important to remember that harassment can happen to anyone. While it's true that female stewards have been harassed by men more frequently than any other situation in our program, all of the other combinations happen too. Among ourselves and our partner programs, we've had male stewards harassed by women, male stewards harassed by men, female stewards harassed by women. When people are open to the public for long enough, everything that can happen probably will. Last year, we learned about a charter boat captain who liked to tell two of our male stewards about his sexual fantasies regarding their female coworker. This had happened the previous year, and we didn't even learn about it until our training for the next season, when those two male stewards came back to work for us again. So this captain was harassing the female steward even though she wasn't present, but he was directly harassing the male stewards by making them so uncomfortable with his explicit language. So please keep in mind that any member of your staff can be harassed. Okay, steward reactions. These are the most common ways that they react. When people do something inappropriate or shocking, a steward often doesn't know how to respond during the event, or they don't want to deal with the seriousness of it, so they minimize it, turn it into something less serious when they talk about it, or they'll never tell anyone at all. So why does it happen? Why do they respond this way? And our educator talked about the brain's automatic reaction last year during our training. Most of us know about the fight or flight reaction, but in reality, it's fight, flight, or freeze. And freezing is at a sign of danger. It's a common survival instinct that throughout evolution has kept organisms alive. Sometimes if you freeze completely still, a predator can't find you. It's a less helpful reflex for humans today, but it still happens and people can't control it. They aren't expecting this attack and they just freeze. So unless they've had other jobs or other life experiences that train them to anticipate and react to unpleasant things happening out of the blue, they're just not likely to be ready with a perfect counterattack to bad situations. The second one here, the difficulty overcoming the customer service mindset. Our stewards and most stewards in New York State are working voluntary programs where they're trained to be friendly and welcoming to boaters. So when a situation moves from something pleasant and normal into something creepy, it's a gear change, and they may have trouble mentally going on the defensive. And they may feel embarrassed or humiliated. It may not be comfortable to explain to your supervisor that a boater old enough to be your parent or grandparent kept talking about how nice your butt looks in your shorts. It's an uncomfortable thing to describe, kind of even for me to say right now. So sometimes they just try to forget about it. Okay, and how supervisors must respond. Are you okay? Check on their physical and mental health first. Allow them to tell you the story at their own pace without grilling them. Ask them if there's anything they need at the moment. A longer lunch or a break to get away from the launch. Do they need to go home for the day? Do they feel comfortable working alone, or would they rather work with someone else or go to a different launch if possible? They may not need any of these things. It may have been a lower level incident that they just want to tell you about, but it's crucial to check on how they're doing. And then you ask how they'd like the situation to be handled. This can vary so widely based on what happened. They could simply be giving you an alert about someone who might not return to that location, so they might not feel that any action is needed right then. They could be asking you for advice on how to handle a slightly creepy boater who regularly uses their launch. Or it could be more serious, involving a person who said explicit things, tried to touch them, did touch them, or has started stalking them. In serious cases, you may not be able to do what the steward asks if they ask for nothing to be done, because you might not be able to do that. You might need to respond in a more serious way in order to protect them, like calling law enforcement or contacting the organization that the harasser works for, if that happens to be known. So consult with your own boss, or in situations like ours, we can talk to our HR department or to our campus public safety office, because they're very experienced in handling situations like this. But no matter what you do, always keep the steward informed about the actions that will be taken, because you don't want them to feel ignored or blindsided, or they're basically being victimized twice by the same incident if you do that. And the fourth point here, maintaining confidentiality, it can be extremely important. Sometimes the steward will have connections to the person outside of the launch. Last summer, we had a stalking incident where the stalker was associated with our college and was friends with other people the steward knew. So they can be anxious about repercussions, about others finding out what they reported. So the information about the incident should never reach anyone who doesn't need to know in order to handle it. Every situation is different, of course. The steward may want everyone to know so others can watch out for a specific person. So situations like that are less complicated. But if they're not, the less complicated category, pay close attention to how the steward feels so you can maintain confidentiality if it's needed. And use all of your local resources to protect them. During the stalking incident that I mentioned, we were actually able to get a picture of the stalker from Facebook and a picture of his car and license plate. And I gave both of these items to the DEC staff at the entrance booth of the campgrounds where the steward's launch was located, so they could be on watch for him. And the DEC staff there also gave our steward a radio so she could call for help if he did manage to get into the campgrounds, because the launch was located in a far corner and there's no cell service at that location. So you may be able to do similar things to protect your staff depending on the area. Okay, things not to say. The things on this list may seem obvious to you when you read them now, but various stewards have told me that all of these things have been said to them, either by previous supervisors in this job or in other jobs. And it's why we need this type of training. Like the first one, why did you react like that? This question is both judgmental and useless because the steward isn't likely to have an answer for you. Think back to the freeze reflex that we talked about. Now, imagine that I tell you about a harassment incident where a steward was crouched down to Watercraft and the boater said to them, "Hey, I've got some other work that you could do on your knees." And right now, you've already had way more time to think about reacting to that awful comment than the steward did when it happened, because I told you it was coming. So it's not helpful, and it's actually cruel to ask why they did something or to tell them that they should have reacted differently. So please stay far away from this type of language. Even if the steward didn't leave the launch as quickly as you instructed them to do during initial training, don't scold them for that after an incident. That's not the time, and it's not helpful. And telling them it doesn't sound like a big deal. Never ever minimize something that made a steward uncomfortable. No one experienced it except the steward, so no one has the right to tell them that it wasn't a big deal. And that's very similar to the fourth one. Oh, that person is harmless. During our training last year, a supervisor reported that when she was a steward, her own supervisor at the time had said that to her. And I can't stress enough how dangerous that kind of thinking is. A person may seem harmless to others because they were only targeting one particular steward, so no one else sees the behavior. That's what predators do. So even if that isn't the case, if the harasser is treating everyone the same, again, no one has the right to tell a steward that they shouldn't feel uncomfortable about any type of behavior. If it bothers them, that's all that matters. So whether you are directly supervising stewards yourself or you're training others to supervise them, keep these key points in mind. And how to train from the first day. We begin our training at hiring and reinforce it throughout the season. Their safety is always number one, and you can't tell them that too many times. If you're able to get a professional to deliver the specialized harassment training like we did, that's ideal. Planned Parenthood, where we found our sexual assault prevention educator, they have a network of these educators across New York State. Or you can check with other local nonprofits or local health centers to see if they have this type of position on staff. Prior to training, you can ask returning stewards or supervisors if they have stories from previous seasons that they're comfortable sharing, and you'll probably get volunteers like we did. A lot of people are, fine with openly talking about what happened to them. It really helps to make new people feel more secure when they see others opening up honestly about the subject. And the fourth point here about reporting so everyone can be protected, it's so critical to emphasize this because it can prompt reports from some people on your staff who might be kind of hardened. We've had some older stewards who were bartenders or had other jobs in past life where they saw quite a bit of harassment. And folks like this sometimes develop a habit of brushing off creepy behavior. But if you can get them to think about their younger or more vulnerable coworkers who might be really scared by the same behavior, it can prompt them to report for the good of others. So please encourage this kind of team thinking. And the last point is also so critical. So hopefully stewards will be less prone to minimizing warning signs. Just remind them their instincts are good and they should always listen to them. All right, these are some specific procedures that we put into place. Only first names on name tags helps to protect the stewards from stalking. Because social media today makes it very easy to look up information if a stranger gets your full name. For schedule information, this is another protection if someone starts to focus on a specific and tries to learn their schedule. Now, this might not apply to your own program if you have the same stewards working the same locations on an unchanging schedule, but ours is more variable because we have a lot of locations. So our stewards are trained to say, oh, I don't know, our schedules change all the time if someone asks about, who's going to be working on any particular day. And the point about conserving internal information is another that may not apply to a small program. We have a large workforce, and while all of the stewards need the full contact info for their whole management chain, stewards in different regions working far apart, they don't have a work reason to need each other's cell phones or email addresses or anything. So we don't share everyone's full info with every steward. To this point, we haven't had a large number of reports of harassment between members of our staff, but there have been a couple of lower level events where people texted someone when it wasn't requested or welcomed by that person. So we took the safety step to only share personal information to the extent that is required for work. And the last point about encouraging stewards not to share personal information with boaters, this was actually brought up by a young steward during our very first specialized harassment training in 2016. She told us if boaters asked where she lived or where she went to high school, she would just give them false information. because she didn't feel comfortable sharing personal details with strangers. So now at the beginning, we tell all of our stewards that they can absolutely do this too, anytime they don't want to give out their information. Okay, and these are more measures, because as it says at the top, confrontation can be hard. And it can feel awkward and uncomfortable, and sometimes stewards don't want to escalate a situation, especially if they're by themselves. So while we're very clear to them that we support their right to directly tell a boater to leave them alone, we know that that can be difficult. So we teach them other strategies too. And these distancing tactics that you see here can sometimes be very effective at putting off unwanted attention. We take them through everything on this list. They can circle away from a boater to maintain personal space. All of our stewards have a table with AIS literature on it, so it can help to stand behind it to maintain a space buffer that way. If a boater wants to keep talking to them for an uncomfortable length after the inspection is over, they each have a tablet loaded with various reference material, so they can just say, oh, I have to complete a study assignment from my supervisor, or I'm going to get in trouble at the end of the day, and conclude the conversation that way. Or fake a phone call to a supervisor. And they can always leave the launch, of course. Often if they take a brief break, it means the boater's gone when they get back. And for the last one, we have a lot of locations where stewards work alone, but we also have a good amount where they co-steward together due to a busy launch or the presence of the decontamination stations in our program. So stewards can look out for each other if they pick up that a boater is making their coworker nervous. They can do it in a deflecting style, where simply inserting themselves into the conversation might make things better, or they can directly engage and tell the boater to stop doing that problematic behavior toward their coworker if they're comfortable doing that. Okay, record keeping. We named our harassment tracking list the Creepy People Log, simply because it's a less intimidating name than sexual harassment incident list. And hopefully stewards will feel more relaxed about adding to something called the Creepy People Log. It's all about making reporting seem accessible and not intimidating to the stewards. And we remind them at intervals, encourage reporting, because it's so clear that we didn't do harassment training as a required checklist item at the beginning if we keep reminding them about reporting. And bad behavior from the public most likely escalates throughout the season as it gets busier, so reminders are crucial then. Trying to track the frequency pattern from year to year can be hard. We don't tend to have the same people working the same locations over the years, so it's difficult to do comparisons about the reliability of our numbers since people behave differently when it comes to reporting, but we do try. And it appears to be getting worse over the last 2 years, unfortunately. For a more steady data indicator, our partner program on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain has had more stewards who are multi-year employees working the same launches, and they also report a significant increase in harassment over this same period. So it's depressing, but please be alert that it may be getting worse in your areas too. Okay, so these are the main points that I hope you'll take away with you today. Safety, contact information, reporting, team protection mentality, never being judgmental about reactions. But I'd like to focus especially on the last one, because no matter how much you encourage your stewards and how many incidents you hear about, there will always be things that you're never going to hear. That's just the reality of sexual harassment and assault. And yeah, it's the reality. There's always events that go unreported. So keep this at the front of your mind, because it will motivate you to constantly do better about encouraging your stewards to talk to you. Okay, in conclusion, be fierce about protecting your stewards. Never forget that they're often working alone and they can feel really isolated, especially if they work in an area where they don't see other people from their organization very often. Here you can see some of our recent AWI stewards, and there's a couple older people in this picture selection, but most of them are younger, like most of our workforce is. Now, naturally, older people can need protection and encouragement too. I'm not saying that they don't, but younger people usually need it much more because they haven't experienced as much of life yet. And this may be their first job. So it's our job to make sure that everyone in our programs feels as safe as we can possibly make them feel and receives all the support that we can give. Okay, so we can move on to questions if anyone has them. Although before I do, I encourage you to reach out to me directly if we can't get to everything today, especially if you would like to have a specialized educator speak at your training. Because if you can't find a local resource yourself, I can put you in touch with our own educator who has a wide network across the state and would absolutely be willing to help you with that.
Thank you, Sue. That was excellent. I know I learned a lot as well, and we would like folks to start posting questions on the chat box. Sue and Samantha have control if they need to unmute someone to get into a more directed dialogue, but we would prefer folks use the chat, and we'll turn it to Sue to try to answer as many of the questions that you might have. Sue?
Yes, I can see one question already from Crystal Costa. Yes, I am absolutely able to share our training presentations with other programs. Please just contact me directly, and yeah, we'll share all the materials with you. Yeah, Kristen asked the same thing. Okay, do we feel that the increased emphasis on harassment is scaring your stewards during training? That's a great question, and that was partially why I really wanted to get the education professional to come and speak to our stewards, because it can be easy to scare people about this. You want to have it, you know, be accessible and friendly enough while also serious enough, and I knew that we might struggle with that balance. So that's why we wanted the sexual assault prevention educator to come with us. I think we do a good enough job making it both informative and warning them to a degree that they have to be on guard, but there was also a lot of laughter in the room too while it was happening. So, I mean, it can be a kind of a fine line to walk, but the part that really helps the most is having stewards from previous years tell these stories, and they're being open about it and obviously not completely freaked out about it at the time, because not only are they telling the story in front of a room full of people, but they came back to work for us again. So that's one of the ways that having people tell about their own experiences really does help for that. Okay. Is there specific training for coworkers on how and when to step in for help? It's a section in the training when we run them through a more expanded version of what I read to you guys today, about here's a situation, you know, maybe you can just go over there, get between them, start talking to the boater, redirect their energy, you know, redirect their attention. We run them through several different scenarios describing how they can intervene and help their coworker. And that's very, you know, it seems to work out pretty well. Okay. Do we ever have...
Sue, this is Dave. If I could step in for a moment and just remind folks, if you do have to leave early, there was a link on the evaluation in the chat box. We would ask you to do that. And I would also offer up that many programs are operated by universities or non-for-profits. I know as Cornell University staff, we all have to take sexual harassment and general harassment training, and many of your universities have an office that's dedicated to this, and usually they have excellent presenters that can assist you, especially when it does come to students. So there's a lot of resources you may have right at your own institutions that you can take advantage of to help.
That's great, Dave. Thank you. Okay, question from Sarah. Do we ever have 2 people at a launch as policy? I know it would be more expensive to run. Yeah, you're right. Our funding just does not allow us to have 2 people at every launch. You know, it would be, in a way, it would be great if we could, just for the protection aspect. But I mean, if you think back to some of the remote pictures that we had, like there's not enough traffic that there would be enough work for 2 people at any one time. So to this point, no, our funding doesn't allow us to have 2 people at all locations. But with the presence of decontamination stations, more of our locations do have more than 1 steward there. Do we ever have stewards afraid to leave the boat launch out of fear they won't get paid or someone will take materials left behind? Do you go over beforehand that safety is priority? Yes, absolutely. Yep, we tell them anytime they're afraid, they leave, get to a safe place, and then call us. Over and over again, we tell them that. We assure them that don't worry about your paycheck, don't worry about any of your gear. If you feel unsafe, leave. Like if their iPad is in their hands, you know, their tablet that they use to record, you know, take it with them, but do not hang out at that launch to go retrieve the iPad, retrieve anything, just leave. All the stuff can be replaced except for them. So we're very, very clear about that from the beginning. Okay, share contact info again. Yep, let me pop up my screen one more time so you can all see it. Sorry guys, this is my first time doing the screen share. There we go, so everyone can write down my email address if you need it. And you can always contact the Sea Grant organizers as well. They have my full information.
And for those not aware, that picture that Sue just put up was actually taken yesterday in the North Country, just for those folks that don't really sometimes realize what lake effect and heavy snow can be.
Actually, that was an older picture at the South Pole, but some of the days up here feel like it anyway.
Other questions that folks have, please feel free to put them on the chat so that Sue can help you here. But always appreciate when our presenters are willing to follow up with you individually. And you may have some questions on some experiences you have had that you may want to talk to Sue directly about, because that will also help her to continue to be able to share with all of us on some of those experiences that you might not want to talk about here. But also sharing those experiences can help all of us as we continue to move forward in working with you know, the stewards that we have and the staff that we bring on for these short periods of time.
Yes, that's great. Doug left some great advice on there about how they do their staffing and everything. Yep, that's more material about how to just deter creepy people. You know, staff talk to each other. One person can ask another for help to, you know, just take them away from the creepy boater. Any kind of intervention like that will often just head off, you know, a bad interaction at the beginning. And if you are running a new or small program and you don't have a lot of incidents that you know about that you could describe during your own training, also reach out to me for that. And, you know, we have a depressingly long list of things that have happened to boat stewards in New York State that we could tell you about.
Hey, Sue?
Yes?
This is Mark Granger. I put a chat in, but somehow you haven't gotten to it. I don't know if it fell off the bottom. Running the program up in Paradox. Good to hear you, and thank you for everything you did. Question, suppose it's not actually sexual harassment, unquote, but it instead is arguing about our program. That is having to look at the boats, having to stop to be checked. You know, what do we tell our folks about, you know, when that starts getting out of hand? You get somebody there that is offended that you have to look through his boat, you have to make sure it's been washed out and things like that. Anything extra to add on to that aspect? Thanks.
Yeah, those are the more common, you know, kind of negative interactions that the stewards will have. And, you know, we just have to tell them to do their best. But if the person shows signs of getting too aggressive, they have to back off. Because, you know, we're not the ECOs, we're not the rangers, we're not the people who can make anybody do anything right then. And yeah, we don't want to amplify them to the point of anger where the steward might get hurt. You know, if sometimes it's possible if you can observe that the person is actually violating the state regulations, there's material on their boat, the steward has the option to call the ECOs or rangers. But if the steward themselves with, they have none of the training that the ECOs and rangers have, they don't have anything to protect themselves with. And like they don't have the authority to physically bar someone from that location. All they can do is tell them about the regulation, tell them, try to convince them the best way they can, but they have to disengage if the boater's getting too angry. They just have to. That's unfortunately the reality of our job. I hope that was helpful, Mark. I mean, I know it doesn't help solve the behavior from the boater's perspective. Like, how do we get these people to cooperate? I don't have an answer for that. Some people are just never going to want to cooperate.
Yes, and I appreciate that. Unfortunately, we had an incident 2 years ago at the Screw Town Boat Wash where two boaters got into a fight over delay in launching boats.
Yep.
Had nothing to do with our poor steward. Our steward called the police because they were beating each other up. But by the time the state police got there, it was like almost over, and it took them about 25 minutes to get there.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's like a difficult part of it. The launches are not often close to law enforcement showing up when you do call. And yeah, like I mentioned, the steward's often just watching this stuff happen around them. It's not always happening to them, And angry boaters because of delays in launching or retrieving. Oh boy, I have a list of those incidents that are longer than the harassment incidents.
The other thing we tell our stewards is that they need to be aware that ECO officers are often way away, and that there's generally only one or two state police cars anywhere near southern Essex County.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, the people may come to this job, particularly if they're from big cities, with an expectation that they get a 3-minute or a 5-minute response on stuff like that, what they might expect in New York City or Boston or someplace like that. You're not going to get that, and that's something we always tell our stewards. It isn't like the cavalry's going to suddenly appear. And
right.
That's why they get out of there rather than calling for support.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're very clear to our stewards that even if you call the ECO and ranger, there's no guarantee that they're in the area or that, they're not working something, a lot more important than coming to check a boat with mussels on it. Yeah, I mean, we can try to call enforcement, but if enforcement doesn't come and like Janine asked, what happens if the stewards do find a boat with mussels on it? If that person is bound and determined to go into the lake and they're not listening to you and enforcement doesn't show up, there's nothing you can do. Order them that they can't throw themselves in front of the boat or try to fight the boater. That's just not what their job is. That's not what they're there for. Their job is to be as persuasive as they can without putting themselves into danger.
Sue, I don't know if you saw it, but Janine asked a good question about what protocols do you have if someone finds an invasive species on a boat?
Yeah, I mean, if they find it, we'll, do our damnedest to convince them to let us inspect, remove the stuff, try to get them to go to one of the decontamination stations. Almost all the time they will. One time last year, we had somebody who drove 45 minutes away from the launch to go get their boat decontaminated, and then the decontamination took about 90 minutes because there was so many zebra mussels on it. So it's often surprising the extent that people will go to cooperate, but if they're not going to do it, there's nothing you can do about it. Inform your supervisor that it happened. I watched this boat covered with curly leaf just go into the launch. There may be a rapid response team in your area that might be able to go in and scan and see if they're able to find if, an infestation has begun. But yeah, the steward cannot physically stop that boat from going into the lake, unfortunately. Only the ECOs and rangers, other law enforcement, if they were willing. Other law enforcement does not usually want to get involved with environmental regulations in most areas. But yeah, it's only law enforcement that can physically stop someone from going through a public boat launch. Okay.
Thank you. Any additional questions that folks have as we head towards our wrap-up time that they wanted to make sure they check with Sue on?
Let's see. Jane had a very good question. How do you handle an overly passionate Lake Association volunteer? We have had this challenge before. We continue to have this challenge every year. Volunteer Lake Association stewards who a lot of time they're, shore owners, people who are very invested in, protecting that particular lake. And in one occasion, there was almost a fist fight between that volunteer steward and the boater. It's an ugly, ugly situation. The steward should not have to completely handle that themselves. They call their supervisor and tell them they're having trouble with the organization that's volunteering. Sometimes there's like a head of the organizing committee that you can talk to, head of the Lake Association, try to, bring sense into this, person's head, because it's still voluntary, unfortunately. And like volunteers who are only there for an hour or two inspecting boats will often not have the overall understanding of how much worse it is just to make people more furious. They're concentrated sometimes on throwing themselves in front of that boat, and it's an ugly situation. Go to the heads of your program maybe to ask for more advice. I have never found a way to absolutely solve that problem. We have volunteers who have managed to alienate boaters nearly every year, unfortunately. Okay, how many decontamination stations are there nearby? It's one of the barriers, not having enough stations in your area. Okay, maybe hard to convince people not to enter the lake. Yeah, I mean, we have quite a few. We had 27 decontamination stations in the Adirondack Lake Champlain region this year, and it's still not enough. I mean, there were still plenty of places in our program where, the launch was too far away and most people were not really going to go get decontaminated. If they won't go to the decontamination station, but they will let your steward try to scrub off or hand remove as much as they can, you'll have to settle for that. It's another barrier. Maybe if there's not a decontamination station close by, but there's like a car wash, that might be something else to try to talk them into. But, at the end of the day, until there's more decontamination stations and more locations, you will have a fraction of people who they're not going to cut short their nice day on the lake. They're not going to shorten their time to go get decontaminated.
As we're coming to the end of the hour, I know you all join me in thanking Sue. That was exceptional. Appreciate your openness and honesty with the answers, and really helping folks think through how do we protect our interns and make sure they do feel safe and secure on site and as part of the whole team. So to Sue and Samantha, I say thank you. And again, we would ask folks to please fill out the evaluation. This, as well as the prior 3 webinars, will be available online. And as I just saw online, always remember, in upstate New York, there's 2 seasons, boating season, and boating season is coming, unlike Minnesota, Doug, where it's winter and winter is coming. So have a great boating season, everyone. We wish you the best of luck. And please take advantage of all the presenters we've had if you have questions, concerns, or can share stories, because we all appreciate learning from each other when it comes to having a good steward program. Have a great summer, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.